sealing it when he came back into the room where her mother was. The arguing continued. He threatened her. She said she was going to call the police. He told her she wasn't going to call anyone. She said, quote, "Whatever, James," unquote. She went to lay on her side of the bed, and he stabbed her in the neck and immediately started to choke her. When he released his grip from her neck, she fell off the bed onto the floor. KT stood there in shock. She couldn't believe what she had just saw. Her father told her to come and help move her mother into the bathroom. She was still frozen and unable to move. He put the knife to her cheek, the same knife he used to kill her mother. He would kill her too. She believed him. Why wouldn't she? She would help stick her mother's body in the freezer. Later on, he would force the girl to help him dismember her mother's body, cutting arms, legs, decapitating her, and wrapping each part up. The little girl had to hold her mother's decapitated head while her father wrapped it. He was yelling and screaming at her the entire time. At this point, her brothers were outside in the car for the 3 hours, waiting on a surprise. They all drove around to the surrounding dumpsters to get rid of the evidence. The brothers didn't know that they were getting rid of evidence that had killed their mother. When they returned back to the apartment, one of the brothers had made a comment. It stunk. They went back out, returned the power saw, and went to Family Dollar to buy cleaning supplies. He threw that knife away that he used to kill her mother in a trash can outside the discount store. When they returned back from the discount store, unbeknownst to them, the brothers helped clean up the crime scene. Had the brothers even asked where the surprise was? He would wake KT up again later that night. Just the two of them would take that long drive down to the Mississippi River and dispose her body. The parts were everywhere and anywhere. He told her to stay by the car on the highway with the cell phone to her ear in case someone noticed. They would think that she was having car trouble. Cross-examination. KT was terrified. At this time, she felt like she couldn't call the police. Yes, she had a cell phone in her hand, but she witnessed her mother's murder. She had to package her mother's feet, hands, in bags. She knew her father was capable of anything. During the trial, they would discuss Hawkins Jr.'s past crimes. He had 7 prior convictions. At the time of the murder, Hawkins Jr. was 30 years old and on parole with, again, 7 prior felony convictions. He never completed high school, though he worked at the Nike factory. He had borderline intellectual functioning and reported an IQ of 77. The average person scores between 85 and 115, and anything over 145 is genius, and under 75 is low intelligence. Some articles called it retardation. Hawkins Jr. had never even been married, had been absent from his children's lives months before the murder. He would kill his girlfriend 6 months after they rekindled. November 12, 1997, aggravated robbery at a Piggly Wiggly employee. 2 men robbed a store at gunpoint. The wounds that were inflicted on the woman in question were after death. The family members of this woman would tell the impact of her death. Why was he even remaining free after this? They spoke about the background of Hawkins Jr. Hawkins was born in 1977. He was one out of 20 siblings. His mother had 8, 2 boys and 6 girls, but only 4 children were with Hawkins Sr. At this time, Hawkins Sr. was under investigation for sexually abusing minor children who lived with him. 5 minor children had been removed from the home and placed with adult sisters that had been sexually abused by their father, Hawkins Sr. Hawkins Sr. had a 15-year-old, never stated gender, sleeping on the floor and not feeding the children. The 15-year-old was not being sexually abused, but was being physically and mentally abused. Hawkins Sr. had been physically abusive with the women in his life. Hawkins Jr.'s mother was pregnant with him when he used to push and shove her around. His mother also stated that Hawkins Sr. had never lived with them. He would occasionally help out with rent, buy clothing, but he never married her or was even in the household as a family with the children. Hawkins Jr. would speak on his own mental abuse about his father when he was 19. Hawkins Jr. was talking to his younger brother, Chris, who was 15, on an outside phone. Chris would get shot and killed by an unknown assailant. Hawkins Jr. would go to the crime scene where his little brother laid shot and dead. He never received counseling, and the death of his brother bothered him. He never wanted to talk about it. The family on his father's side started to blame him for Chris's death. Within a year, Hawkins Jr. had committed robbery and served prison time. The application of the order of protection signed by the victim, Charlene Gator, was introduced as evidence. January 15th, 2008, Charlene's statement before her death. Hawkins Jr. was under the impression that he would be moving with me and my 3 children. When he realized he wasn't moving with us, he became violent, pulling my hair. He hit me in my right cheek and my jaw with his fists. He was telling KT to lock herself in the bathroom and to call the police and say that I was pulling her hair. He wasn't arrested for this violence. She said he wants my 12-year-old around him all the time and often. She sleeps with him in the same bed. She has changed. She tells lies, and she has become very disrespectful. I hope he hasn't molested her. He says no, she says no, but they both lie. I am just trying to protect my children. I don't want him around my children. I don't trust him. James Hawkins Jr. said I was wrong for trying to take KT away from him, but something's not right. So, James Hawkins Sr., the father of 20, would hear the judge sentence his son to death. After Hawkins Sr. found out about his son's fate, a row of cameras waited outside for his reaction. He was very upset. Quote, "They lied on me. They lied on my son. I don't have anything to say. Get out my face," unquote. The court would soon be filing past crimes against Hawkins Sr. James Hawkins Jr. His sentence. He would be convicted in 2011, and the courts had sentenced him to death. He was supposed to be executed in May 2018, but the Tennessee Supreme Court says his appeals process is nowhere near over. He is incarcerated at an institution in Nashville. Charges were filed on Hawkins Sr. He was found guilty in the child rape of 2 girls starting at the age of 6 years old. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison for each child rape. They found him guilty on 2. So he will be serving 50 years and he's not eligible for parole. He was 62 years old when he was sentenced, so he will ultimately die in jail. I hate these young children had to be a part of their mother's death. Knowingly and unknowingly, it sits in the back of my mind. I know you cannot say what you will or won't do when you're faced in a situation, but she had suspicions he was raping her daughter. The pregnancy proved it. She had decent exes in her life that weren't holding resentment, that tried to help her and give her advice. Why didn't she just leave and never return? The physical abuse would have been enough for me. But we know women will stay with physically abusive husbands and boyfriends, knowing it will never get better. It will only get worse.